All right, welcome back everybody. I'm Seth Monahan, professor of music theory, and this is the third video in my series on the basics of classical harmony and counterpoint. In this video, we delve into the dark world of minor scales. Now you remember from our last video that every major scale has a so-called relative minor scale, one that shares the same key signature and thus the same notes. And it's easy to see here with C major. Here are the notes of C major, all white keys. And so if we simply shift those to the left so that they start and end on A, we have A minor, or more specifically what's called the A natural minor scale. Let's put this on screen. Now, as with the major scale, we number the notes of the minor scale from 1 to 7 with the little hats that tell us that these are called scale degrees. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. What's changed, of course, is the half-step, whole-step pattern. Previously, in major, we had half steps between 3 and 4 and 7 and 1. Now we have them between 2 and 3 and 5 and 6. We also have functional names, as we did in major, and these are all the same except for one. Notice that scale degree 7 is no longer called the leading tone. Now it's called the subtonic. The reason is that in natural minor, we no longer have that magnetic half-step relationship between 7 and 1. Now there's a whole step. You remember the sound, and I hope the feeling of going from 7 to 1 in major, that pull of the leading tone up to tonic. In natural minor, we don't have that. It doesn't have that same pull. Now, of course, classical composers noticed this, and they didn't like it. So they almost always used an accidental to raise the subtonic to make it a proper leading tone. This gives us the so-called harmonic minor scale, and it lets us have progressions like this instead of like this. Not that there's anything wrong with the last one. The point is that it just doesn't sound much like Haydn or Mozart. Indeed, composers who write for film and TV will often use the natural minor rather than the harmonic minor to create a kind of exotic, pre-modern sound. You may recognize this from the Game of Thrones theme music. That wonderful second chord is made possible because it uses the subtonic, not the leading tone. But back to harmonic minor. The good news is that raising 7 gave classical composers a proper leading tone and the harmonic power that comes with it. However, by moving 7 closer to 1, by making that half step, we create a larger gap between 7 and 6. It's a gap of 3 semitones now, larger even than a whole step. In our next video, which is about intervals, we'll learn that this is called an augmented second. And in Renaissance and Baroque Europe, this was regarded as an ugly, unsingable interval, something composers should definitely avoid. Here's how it sounds. There's the augmented second. So the solution they eventually figured out was to raise scale degree 6 as well, making what's called the melodic minor scale, which sounds like this. Melodic minor solves the problem of the overlarge augmented second because by raising scale degree 6, we now have a whole step on either side of it, making for a smoother, more singable scale. So to summarize very quickly, the difference between the 3 minor scales rests on whether scale degrees 6 and 7 are in their natural position, which is lowered, or raised by semitone. However, somewhere along the line, somebody decided that it would be really cool to have a single scale that contained both versions of scale degree 6 and scale degree 7. So they decided that melodic minor would actually be different going up and down. When we go up the scale, degrees 6 and 7 are raised, and when we go back down, they're lowered. And we see this pattern in real music all the time. Let's take a look at the opening of Beethoven's F minor Quartet, Opus 95. I'll play it in a second, and it comes on pretty quickly. But what I want you to listen for is the way it descends from F, scale degree 1, to C, scale degree 5, down through the lowered version of melodic minor and up through the raised one. That goes by quickly. Let's slow it down a bit. Here we are. 1, 7, 6, 5 going down, and then when he goes back up, he raises them. 5, 6, 7, 1. A textbook instance of melodic minor as we teach it. However, in reality, things are often a bit more flexible when it comes to how composers use scale degrees 6 and 7 in minor. Consider this passage from Bach's E minor keyboard partita. We're in E minor here, and the melody is basically a scale that starts on tonic, rises through more than an octave, and then goes back down, although there's a little wrinkle in the middle. It leaps a bit. It sounds like this. And the thing to notice here is that Bach uses the melodic minor scale exactly the wrong way. When he's rising from scale degree 5 to 1, 5, 6, 7, 1, he ascends using the lowered version. So he's going up the down version of melodic minor, and he does exactly the opposite at the end of the phrase when he descends 7, 6, 5 using the raised version. So again, it sounds like this, and there's nothing weird about it. Indeed, it would be a lot less stylistic if Bach had not raised scale degree 6 in that last bar. If he had gone through the harmonic minor, it would give us a sound that was not very much like a Baroque keyboard piece. However, another caveat, before too long, composers would actually get a whole lot braver when it came to navigating through that supposedly ugly augmented second interval. Here's the very famous opening of Mozart's 40th Symphony in G minor. So when we listen to the recording, notice how he passes right through that augmented second from F sharp to E flat without the slightest hesitation. Now, to be sure, that interval still has a slightly jagged, angular quality to it. But I think that's precisely the effect Mozart wants in this brooding, turbulent melody. So just to sum up, while it's important to know your harmonic and melodic minor scales as they're typically taught, it's also helpful to think of all three scales forming a single system in which scale degrees 6 and 7 simply have two positions, a raised one and a lowered one, that composers used for a variety of reasons and a variety of musical effects. So at this point, it might be helpful to think about major and minor scales in parallel, that's to say, starting on the same note. Until now, we've only thought about them in terms of the relative relationship, as when C major and A minor share the same notes. Now I want to think about how C major relates to C minor. And of course, this means all three versions: C natural minor, C harmonic minor, and C melodic minor. Now, it probably won't shock you to know that all these scales have C in them. It's the tonic of the key. But if you look closely, they actually share four notes. Not just C, but also D, which is scale degree 2, F, which is scale degree 4, and G, which is scale degree 5. So among all four scales, it's really only scale degrees 3, 6, and 7 which are variable. Now, what does this mean in practical terms? For me personally, I find thinking about scales in parallel to be a much more useful tool for memorization than thinking in terms of the relative relationship. Let's say I'm thinking about C minor. When I'm thinking about C minor, I don't want to have to think about E flat major, the relative major scale, while I'm thinking about C minor. That's a distraction to me. It's much more helpful to think of C minor as part of this family of scales that all share four notes and have three of them that vary. You can even think about it very systematically. You can think that to get the natural minor scale, we take the major scale and we lower three notes. We lower scale degrees 3, 6, and 7 while leaving the other ones alone. Along these same lines, to get harmonic minor from major, we only lower two notes. We lower scale degree 3 and 6, but we leave 7 alone. We leave 7 raised so that it's that leading tone. And along these same lines, melodic minor would require us only to lower scale degree 3, the rest of the notes all being identical to major. And thinking about scales in parallel like this ends up being very useful when you're studying the music of the 19th century, when parallel major and minor are often intermingled bar by bar, even note by note. When composers like Schubert and Mahler are going to love this shading back and forth between major and minor, and we can come to think of major and minor almost as a single system with a bunch of notes that toggle up and down. So this wraps up our study of scales. Now, when we've been doing scales, we've been measuring distances between notes, but only very small distances. Part of our work has been identifying half steps, whole steps, which are 2 half steps wide, and in one case, the so-called augmented second, which is 3 half steps wide. Now, these are useful, but we want to be able to speak very precisely about the distance between any notes, not just ones that are sort of close together. So to do that, we need the specialized vocabulary of what are called intervals. We're going to study intervals in our next video. I hope to see you there.